Okay, continuing on. So I'm talking about where to start with linkages. So I'll call them the big three. I think perhaps we really just have the big two, and then and also ran here when it comes to our quick return. And I'm just giving it a name, quick return. We'll understand what we mean quick return pretty soon. So the 4-bar linkage, as I've already mentioned, is the building block for many other uh, machines. If we want to make something more complicated, we start with a 4-bar, and we continue with a bunch of different 4-bars that are kind of put together to make a machine. And then the slider crank, as we'll see in a slide pretty soon, is kind of a specialized or derivative, maybe I should say, of the 4-bar linkage. You could just think of it as being one of the linkages is just like infinitely long. We could say the blue one in this case. I wish I remade all of this because I kind of had like a color scheme that I stuck with. This was my initial color scheme. I decided the green was my favorite one for ground because it starts with a G, right? GR. But anyway, so let's take a look at some of the animations as part of this. So that you'll see this quick return. There's something which is called quick return, right? It moves. So here is a 4-bar. And this 4-bar is really close to being something we call Grashof or non-Grashof. It's really close to being the transformation between it because the addition of two of the links looks like it's about to equal the addition of the other two links. So I got really close with that one. And we'll understand why soon. And we have this slider crank. I'm calling this a slider crank, but I think I want to call it a crank slider because I'm probably sure to put a motor onto the yellow one, and it's the cranks. That usually the word goes first if it's the one that's driving the thing. Slider crank means, well, maybe I have somebody that's pushing the blue thing back and forth. And then this quick return, let's see if we can tell from this. I believe, I don't want to sound, let's see, whoops, let me go backwards. Oh, go back to here. Let's take a look. Yeah, okay, so the ground here is the red one, and the yellow one is the crank. And you can kind of tell that it goes down slow and then comes up fast. And we will we'll do a little bit with quick return. We could keep using quick return throughout the semester, but we basically will just do the standard back and forth equal. I guess I usually call it non-quick return. I don't know if there's a good way to describe where you don't have the quick return trait, but we'll see that soon. All right, so one of the first things we want to try to do is break down a real machine into these models, right, to try to get a better idea of certain traits of the machine. So we like to try to create kinematic diagrams of the mechanisms. And we have like little building blocks, right? So we might have a basic binary link with this moving joint or with a ground, right? So those are really the basic building blocks that we will use most often. But we can also make them more complicated because we can make a link that has three things connected to it, or 4 things, or any number that you want to make, really. We can also have something that's a slot, that's a ground, but it allows things to move in backward. And you can actually make the case that that's what that right there is what's happening when you have a slider crank or crank slider on the slider side of the thing. It's just another kind of ground, right? Or an extension of a ground. I guess right here, right? So that's what I meant right there, right? So that right there and that right there. Oh, well, actually, yeah, I'll stick with what I just said. We can get a little bit more complicated with maybe a link or a connection like that right there between 2 links. Here is where we get a little. This is something we have to be on the leery of in the beginning of the semester. We won't deal with it too much. Maybe towards the end when we deal with cams, where we have this moving half joint, and what we refer to as a half joint. So here we have to, in order to do the kinematic diagrams and some of the classifications that we in the beginning of the semester, we have to try to count the degrees of freedom. And in order to count the degrees of freedom, we have to take a look at all the linkages that are being put together, the number of linkages and the number of joints. So we have to count links and we have to count joints. That becomes a little bit tricky, mostly because of this, but also because when we have multiple things joining together at one spot, like that right there, because we have this link, and then that link right there. So we have to do this little link math, and that requires us to look closely at kinematic diagrams to be able to do this math that is about to come up. Classified joints as full joints and half joints, where like right here we already saw that is considered a half joint. I wish this was a little bigger. We're not going to do the 3D, and I'm not going to do the 3D because I think it's better to just digest what we can and try to avoid the added confusion of the 3D joints. It's a decision I made early on, and I'm going to kind of stick with it. Here is, okay, so there's a bunch of rules. We can actually want to come back to this page in Norton in a moment when we introduce the mobility right here. So here are the different links. We have a binary link. We already mentioned this a little bit. The binary link and the ternary link, I guess. Quaternary link, sure. And I crossed these out because I meant that we're not going to look at them. We're not going to do the three-dimensional ones. Just causes confusion. We're really not even going to do like this helical joint right here. But you can see how these, as a practical matter, can strain, and we'll have multiple degrees of freedom right here, right? So this guy, he can only rotate delta theta, therefore he has 1 degree of freedom. This can only translate delta x, so it has 1 degree of freedom. This can only rotate, it can't it will translate, but its translation is dependent on its rotation, so it still only has 1 degree of freedom. These one, however, has both translation and rotation, and they're independent from each other, so therefore it has 2 degrees of freedom. This is a rotating full pin, and it really only has 1 degree of freedom when we just look at the pin itself. Don't worry about the total linkage. And the same thing with this sliding joint right here. Yeah, so these are all like 1 degree of freedom right here. So it's these moving translating. These half joints. This one can become a little bit confusing because you have to zoom in and make a decision when you get to a certain part. I'll try to make that clear. I'm not sure I'll be able to soon of this distinction right here. But if you just had this joint right here, you would have this and call it a half joint because it had 2 degrees of freedom. Most of the time, what I would do instead, this is my opinion, is I would instead represent this. First off, this would be ground. And this would be considered a link right there. And this has this link right there, okay? So instead of this up above, I would have, this is a link, this is a link, and also this is considered a link, right? The ground is considered a link, but it's only considered a link one time for an entire mechanism, right? So you don't have to keep counting it every time you have a ground. The ground is the ground no matter where it is in the mechanism. And then you would also include, this is a joint, and this is a joint, right? And in this way, when you're counting up links, like right here, this is a link, and this is a link, which is actually the ground here. And then this one right here is a half joint. So what you basically have is you have two links and a half joint. Here you have 1, 2, 3 links and 2 joints, 2 full joints. You'll see in the math, this actually will work out. But all right, so here is the mobility. Should I start a new one? Okay, let me start a new video right here. So we're about to use those joints, and we're going to use them in the math for the Grubler's equation with the Kutzbach's, Kutzbach, I don't know, his modification. So this is the equation, and we will talk about them in the next video.